This presentation is designed to give you an induction into the what, why, and how of critical reflection, the analytical process at the heart of all good professional practice. My name is Richard Nakane Emerson, and herein I will unpack what critical reflection is, why we need to do it, and why it needs to be done scientifically. I'll then give a very brief introduction and an example of how we can do critical reflection. Let's consider what critical reflection actually is. For a start, critical reflection is not casually reflecting on your observations. When you're given a task and the word reflect is used, you might be tempted to reflect in the way we use reflect in our day-to-day use of language, to give some off-the-cuff thoughts. This is exactly what critical reflection is not. And if you do that for a reflection task at university, again also in a professional context, you will get a very underwhelming reception. Critical reflection is not casually reflecting, it is a systematic process of analysing a situation or idea based on all relevant observations, applying a scientific approach, and referring consistently to the relevant peer-reviewed literature on the topic. So let me just reiterate there. It needs to be systematic, and it needs to be based on all relevant observations, not just some randomly chosen ones. You need to use a scientific approach, and you need to refer consistently to the relevant peer-reviewed literature. So this is research that has been peer-reviewed, published in articles, or written in scholarly books. As you can see, it's a serious process. Now, if you don't have these four elements of systematic analysis, use of all observations, and the application of a scientific approach, as well as the relevant peer-reviewed literature, then what you're doing is not critical reflection. Now, when we say observations, the observations could be what you see, experience, think, and where relevant, it can be emotions. And these can occur in the past or currently. So the tenses you might be using, if you're reviewing an event in the past, could be simple past tense. I did this, I saw this, I felt this. Or you could be reviewing multiple past events until now. I have seen this, I have done this, I have thought or felt this. You could be looking at a current situation that is not permanent. I am doing this, or this is happening. Or you could look at something that is much more generally true. I do this, this happens, I see this, I feel this. So you could be using tenses that are relevant to any of those contexts depending on what the critical reflection task is. Most important thing here is to follow the necessary elements to ensure that they are all in your critical reflection. Otherwise, it just isn't critical reflection. Now I've briefly unpacked what critical reflection is, I'd like to talk to you about why we do critical reflection, the so what, if you like. Well, critical reflection was developed, in fact it probably has been developed over thousands of years, by the science-based professions as a necessary process to improve practice. It's not optional. Without critical reflection, things don't happen as they should. If we did not have the power to reflect on something that is happening or has happened, and then to act upon an analysis of that, of our observations, then terrible things would happen. Our hospitals would be dysfunctional. Terrible errors that happen, that injure people, would not be reflected upon or reviewed, there'd be no improvement, and these things would continue to happen. We wouldn't have the development of functional or effective drugs. Similarly, in engineering, bridges would collapse and aircraft would fall from the sky and no one would do anything about it if we just thought that this was in the hands of the gods or destiny or something we could do nothing about. This is a life without reflection. Similarly, in IT companies would produce vulnerable, dysfunctional software, governments and corporations would continue to buy it, and disaster would ensue, and no one would do anything about it. They might think about it, they might reflect upon it, but if they're not critically reflecting and then developing some kind of strategy based on that, then things will never change. Can you see how critical reflection is an absolute necessary part of all professions? Critical reflection is in fact the difference between competence and incompetence, which is why we want to develop it in professionals at university level, so they enter their professions with very strong skills in critical reflection. Now we can discuss how we do critical reflection, the now what, if you like. The most likely scenario is that you have received a critical reflection task either as an academic task in university or as a professional task in your workplace. The first step requires the most explanation, but is useful, so bear with me. The first thing to do is to identify the logical structure of how you can shape your critical reflection. There are basically two possibilities here. It might be based on analysing a particular situation or event, that is, on a particular set of observations. For example, the task might ask you to reflect on a certain event that occurred in the workplace. You would analyse that situation or event by connecting with various concepts, ideas and principles, that is, the theory in the literature. So your logical structure will start with the description of the event or situation, your observations, and follow with theoretical themes. This is inductive logic, starting with the real, the observation, and following with the theory. For example, I was working in a pizza restaurant as a kitchen hand when suddenly the chef threw a pizza in my face. Why did this happen? What was my reaction and why? So we're starting with a situation or event and then we're analysing it. Alternatively, you could be asked or be expected, or by the question you could infer that you should discuss a particular theme, that is, an academic theory, idea, concept or principle. You would start by framing the idea, theory or concept and then take examples from your observations, situations, events, thoughts, feelings, etc. And so the logic is based around the theory. So the logical structure of your document starts with theory and uses the real as examples. So you're starting with theory, concept, idea, the theme, rather than a particular situation or event. You begin with the theme or concept and then use the observations of the situations, event, thoughts, and emotions to illustrate the points you make. For example, traditional workplace apprenticing approaches and systemic socialization in some industries can lead to the acceptance of workplace violence. I was working in a pizza restaurant as a kitchen hand when the chef threw a pizza in my face. His actions can be seen as an expression of blah, 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 blah. So we're starting with the theory and then following with examples of our observations. This is a more direct and deductive style, requiring and showing more consideration and reflection before the writing process. So it's inherently efficient and clearer, but not necessarily applicable, because if you've been asked to reflect on a particular situation or event, then this wouldn't be an appropriate way of doing things. Okay, so within this second way approach, this sort of theme-based approach, you could also include discrete observations to kick off new ideas, much as you did in the first approach where you start with the observation and go on with theory. So there's a little bit of give there, or play if you like, between the two approaches. The second thing to do is to choose a critical reflection system. The one that we'll be talking about in this course is the Driscoll system, which is fairly well accepted. Driscoll's system composes of what, so what, and now what. We'll talk about that in the next slide. The third thing to do is to outline how you will execute the system of reflection in a written piece. So you've got your logical process, you've decided that in step 1, and you've got a system of doing that you've decided in step 2, then you plan it. Some of you might feel, but wait, planning? I don't do planning. I've never done well if I've planned. Not that I've actually tried that hard, but I always get my best grades for my essays when I write them straight off the cuff, usually the day before, with inspiration. Unfortunately, that does not work with scientific writing, in particular with critical reflection. Don't be tempted to think that inspiration can do the job here. There needs to be some inspiration, but you need to have structure. That's what makes it science. So what you will need in your outline, as a minimum, is a purpose statement that addresses the task. A purpose statement usually rounds off your introduction. And then, for each paragraph, I would recommend you have a topic sentence. The topic sentence will either describe the situation that you're going to analyse, or the set of observations you're going to analyse, or the theoretical idea or concept or theme that you will then unpack using examples from your observations, depending on what you chose in step 1. So a topic sentence would say something like, traditional workplace apprenticing approaches and systemic socialisation in some industries can lead to the acceptance of workplace violence. And then you'd follow that up with analysis based on observations. Okay, so you've got to have some kind of skeleton structure, at least a purpose statement and topic sentences for each body paragraph. The fourth step is to find sources, peer-reviewed references, usually journal articles, and they should be recent and in appropriate journals. So this is from what we call the literature, which is what is written on the topic in the scientific community. And you need to choose these materials for 4 reasons. To define any key ideas that need defining, to show the significance of the ideas that you raise. In order to analyse your observations, you can't just make stuff up. You actually have to get analytical processes from somewhere. And to identify strategies or solutions for future. Now the fifth thing is to do your write-up of your critical reflection so that it addresses the task scientifically and systematically. On this slide, I've basically outlined Driscoll's what, so what, now what process from 2007. See the reference at the end of the slideshow. In the what stage, you describe the action, experience, or observed occurrence on which you are reflecting. In the so what stage, you consider what the action, experience, observation means, the factors contributing to it, its effects, how these relate to the concepts from whatever you're studying or from your field, and you need to use references solidly in this stage. Now what describes in detail how practice can be improved. Now it might be your own practice or it might be the practice of the organisation you're in. It doesn't matter. You still need to have some kind of logical and literature-based recommendations on what can be done. These will not be randomly selected. You will need to consider a number of different avenues or strategies from a number of different sources and then describe why the ones you choose and recommend are the appropriate ones. Now the what, so what, now what process, when we look at it, starts with observation. And that kind of clashes a little with what I suggested in step 1 of the previous slide, where you can either start with observation or you can start with a theme. Essentially, if you start with a theme or a concept, you have your topic sentence describe that concept, and then you start the what, so what, now what process. So the only difference would really be in the topic sentence. We recommend you to learn the Driscoll process and apply it until you're given another more appropriate one to use at another time. Driscoll is applied widely, However, you might encounter another system in your future, and you might choose to use that. Until then, we recommend you use this one because we know that's what you'll be encountering here at Griffith College and also in your academic studies if you continue to Griffith University or other institutions. Let's have a look at an example. Just say you were given the assignment task, consider and develop strategies to address the challenges you will face lecturing in a new university. 500 words. Okay, well, because you have to look at the challenges you'll face and strategies, and it's such a personal topic, a SWOT analysis seems appropriate. So I would conduct a SWOT analysis, identify my weaknesses as a professional, likely threats that could come about in my new situation, and then I would choose the ones that are most significant and really deserve attention. So one of these could be a theme, if you like. In this case, the external factors are quite significant, whereas my skills as a professional may not be as relevant. So I might be focusing less on my weaknesses, more on my threats. In your assignment for this subject, it may not be the same. That's a hint. Now, the system I'll choose, Driscoll's system. Paragraph structure, I think I'm going to go for a deductive style, the second type, where I say my first challenge is X, so it's sort of theme-based. I define that thing, X can be defined as, and then I say why it's significant. Then I go about drawing on observations about myself and the likely situation in order to develop my analysis. The document structure, it looks like 500 words. I could go for 5 paragraphs, an introduction and a conclusion with 3 body paragraphs seems to work here, but the number of body paragraphs, of course, will depend on how many ideas I need to unpack and how challenging they are to unpack. And then I'll start writing. Let's have a look at an example of how this could be done. Okay, so here I've given an example of how a person could write in response to the task presented in the last slide. A short introduction paragraph, this one's a little too short, I've taken a shortcut here, would have some backgrounding in the green highlight there. Learning at the tertiary institution presents a number of challenges to an academic, including, and this is where you would write a little bit more background. There'd be a number of items in there, and each one of them would need to have referenced sources. At this point you say, oh, finding references, that sounds tiring. I think I'll skip this step. You're missing an important step. You need to background your writing with what you're talking about and why it's important. So you do actually need that backgrounding there. Then I need to be open about how I identified these challenges for me. So I show that I've identified by SWOT analysis. Now I've made that point there. Identified by SWOT analysis are my lack of familiarity with the academic culture and expectations of the institution and my lack of familiarity with the needs of the students. So here I've sort of shown my methodology to reaching the points that we're going to discuss in this paper. In blue is my purpose statement. Now this is extremely important, and you need to make sure your purpose statement contains exactly what you're going to do, no less and no more. This is very important. No extra details and no skipped over vague ideas. You've got to be specific and focused, and if that requires an extra clause, so be it. However, don't add in any extra information that's not necessary. Just keep it focused. Here's this one. This paper will critically reflect on these challenges of new institutional culture and student needs, developing strategies to improve my likelihood of success at a new university is probably what should be in there. So I might add that later on. Okay, so that's my purpose statement. The topic sentences should all address that, to focus on that purpose statement. So I've used the term challenge here in the purpose statement. I'll use the word challenge in my topic sentence. That makes a clear logical link there. Now you have to be a little bit careful because things can sound a little bit sameish, and some teachers don't like that, but that's okay. You'll need to maybe show your tutor to make sure that they're not too concerned about your writing there. But generally, I find that using the same word in the purpose statement and in your topic sentences is very helpful. So my first challenge in lecturing at a new university will be my lack of familiarity with the academic culture and expectations of the institutions. So that's the first problem, and I deal with it in this paragraph here. I've identified two main problems, so I'm actually going to end up with a 4-paragraph essay. 2 body paragraphs. One here is on adapting to academic culture. The second one's going to be identifying and working with student needs. So I've got that topic sentence there, and from there I unpack the concept. Understanding the academic culture particular to an institution is a significant factor in the success of a new staff member, as it determines their ability to adapt quickly, etc., etc., etc. So this is the theory, and I've given a source for that, Rohan, 2004. That's a bogus, not real source, by the way. And then I go to observations. As you can see, from there I need to talk about myself. And that would be the section, this is a particular challenge for me, the 4th line in that paragraph, as I have often struggled to read the unspoken requirements of my positions in the past, at times blah, 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 blah. So here, from here on, I alternate between my observations and the theory and find meaning there in that analysis. Further down in the paragraph, if we have a look around here, at this point here, we start working at possible strategies. In order to address my tendency to misinterpret or not see academic culture and institutional expectations, a strategy is required. Okay, then I look at possible strategies to apply. Now, a professional reflection will actually be much more than 500 words, so we have to do things a little bit more briefly here. You would have many more theories and so forth put in with a longer professional document. But in academic work, we want to teach you how to write in a compact way. So here we've had to be a little bit brief, but I've started with Jones et al., suggest, etc., etc., and then I've gone on from there. In a professional situation, I'd probably propose a few more different ideas and compare them and weigh them up against each other. So there it is. Now this is just the introduction and 1 body paragraph. You'll need another body paragraph and a short conclusion which would mention the main points you've considered and then talk about the conclusions you've drawn and the recommendations that you're giving, in this case for yourself. Now, all academic work needs to be referenced. In the next slide, I'll show you a reference list for this paper. You'll notice that the in-text references here use a date in brackets. This is the APA 7 system, and an APA 7 reference list is given in the next slide. I'll show you 2 slides after that, the IEEE version of this same document and the IEEE reference list. Engineers and IT students will use IEEE, and the health science and science students will be using APA 7. So here is the reference list in APA for the APA 7 format document. There are a couple of issues here that I've had with PowerPoint. The hanging indent doesn't seem to work out for me, so this would actually require a hanging indent for each reference. There's a bit of line spacing problems there, but this is generally how the APA system reference list looks. Here is the IEEE version of the same document, and I have given in-text citations as a number in square brackets. So engineers and IT students, you will need to do this style for all your work here. Accordingly, you'll need an IEEE reference list, which looks like this. You'll need bracketed numbers, square bracketed numbers, and it's not in alphabetical order. APA 7 is in alphabetical order. The IEEE system is numbered in order of appearance. So the first item, or the first source that is mentioned, is given 1 and thereafter is referred to as 1 throughout your document. The second reference you use, second different reference from the first one, would be given the number 2, and after that you use 2 throughout your document. So you only need one reference list item for each, just the same as for APA 7. You don't have the same item twice in the reference list. That would only happen if you had references given at the bottom of your page, for example, which is not what we're doing in either system. So there's examples in both IEEE and APA 7 of how you could start doing this kind of reflective work. So we've discussed what, so what, and now what of critical reflection. You see what I did there? It's just a very logical way of explaining something. So I'm just showing that Driscoll's what, so what, now what is inherently logical. So it's useful for reflection, but it's also how we generally explain things. Now what do you do? I'd like you to check out the critical reflection materials in the learning content, week 2 for 1020 QBT. You will find my fancy critical reflection guide, and you will find some other materials that the coordinator, Rita, has put together for you. The next thing to do after that is to look at the task for assessment 1, the critical reflection, and SWOT. Yeah, so the SWOT and the critical reflection go together. Look at the critical reflection task and you can see that it relates to the SWOT in that you can identify your weaknesses and they can be linked to challenges. So the third step, complete your SWOT or make some serious headway on your SWOT as soon as possible. And amongst the weaknesses, you will be able to find the most significant challenges that you have in higher education. And these can be your topics. I recommend 2 topics. You could use 3. 1 seems a little bit light because it's likely that you have more than one challenge. However, dealing with 3 or more challenges won't really be possible in any serious way under the word limit. You might think that you could deal with a threat, an external threat, as a challenge. You can, but I find that it never really works for this assignment. For this assignment, you're expected to show your knowledge of the learning process and the different aspects of learning that are important, such as self-efficacy, self-regulation, adaptive help-seeking, learning styles, etc., etc. Now, if that's what's expected of you in the course, and you write about threats, such as my neighbour's lawnmower, that's a threat to my study. Well, my neighbour's lawnmower is very noisy, but when discussing that and the possible solutions, I don't have any opportunity to talk about the course concepts. It's a dead end in terms of discussion of the theory that we're discussing in the course. And these threats, whether it's a cat that needs to go to the vet all the time, or your car that keeps breaking down, or financial woes, or relationship difficulties, or anything that might be a threat to our study, threats are generally not very helpful as a choice in the first assignment here for 1020 QBT. That's just a hint. Okay, so I'll leave you with it, and I hope you enjoy critical reflection from now into your career. Here is the reference list for this particular presentation. Even though there's only one reference, I still have to call it references, and strictly going with APA 7 requirements, I shouldn't have red text for references, by the way, and I should have a hanging indent there. I'm still finding a way to do that on PowerPoint. So there it is. All the work that you present at university, including class presentations and PowerPoint slides, need to have a reference list at the end that shows what your sources are. Otherwise, it's just not science. Okay, there it is. Good luck in your future work in critical reflection.